Days have shortened, leaves have fallen, and the weather has turned gray. The weather always affects my mood and energy level, and this week, my motivation to do much of anything has been slim to none. Slowly but surely now that the gardening season is coming to a close, I've been catching up on all of my to-dos, and yesterday I decided to get my tomato harvest processed. I like to freeze my tomatoes throughout the season, allowing me to do less preserving while I'm busy in the summer months. I know I had a terrible tomato year, but I don't think I fully realized how bad until I took my bags out of the freezer to thaw out overnight. This year, I devoted more space to growing tomatoes and harvested way less than my previous years. I've had a goal for the last few years to harvest and preserve as much as I can, and I really want to accomplish a year's worth of salsa and tomato sauce one day. My current space is too small to accomplish my big goals, but every year I try to get closer, adding more and more to the space I do have. I've made homemade tomato sauce from my homegrown tomatoes for the last 3 years, and my process is pretty much the same. This year I invested in a roaster oven, and it's been a game changer on canning days like today. As everything roasts down, I also remove some of the extra water to make things go a bit quicker. You may notice that I leave the skins on during this step, and it's because I will be running everything through a tomato press. A tomato press will remove the skin and seeds, leaving a beautiful sauce. It makes life a lot easier when dealing with tomatoes. Once I get everything strained, I'll let the sauce simmer for an additional hour while I clean up the kitchen. One reason I got into canning was because of tomatoes. I wanted to shorten my supply chain when it came to food. The first time I had my homemade sauce, I was hooked, and I knew this would be something I would do every year. It's kind of funny because I actually don't care for tomatoes in their raw form, nor do I really like growing them. Tomatoes are kind of prima donnas, and I hate the high maintenance. Yet somehow, they always take up half my gardening space. I'd be lying if I wasn't disappointed in getting 7 quarts of tomato sauce this year. It's been a goal of mine now for 3 years to make as much as I possibly can. I really want to have a year's worth of tomato sauce, and we got nowhere close. I use typically 2 to 3 jars each time I make spaghetti or lasagna or most pasta dishes. I will typically use 1 if I'm doing any type of like pizza or something like that, but 7 quarts is definitely not going to get us through the year. I can't remember the exact number I had last year, but last year I planted about 10 tomato plants less, give or take, and I still had a pretty good harvest. So the one thing that was just such a killer this year was our intense summer heat. So my plants were doing really well at the beginning of the season. I transplanted, I believe, like 12 of them out from the ones I started inside. Unfortunately, I lost a lot of my tomato starts this year because I got food poisoning right as I was supposed to plant them out, and they were already really large plants, and it completely screwed up my entire hardening off process, and they got left outside longer one day, and my husband didn't bring them inside, not like knowing that they should have been in hours prior. There was a lot of sun damage, and I just had to scrap like more than half of my tomato starts. This upcoming year, I don't think I'm going to start my tomato plants until mid to end of March. I really don't want my plants to be too large, just because large tomato starts, guys, are such a pain in the butt when you're dealing with them inside. Like, my plants were a few feet tall, and when you're dealing with about 40 of them, it was completely obnoxious. And to keep disease off those plants and airflow well is also very difficult to do. So I'm gonna start way later this next season with my tomato starts. That's one thing I'm gonna do different. And I'm also going to completely change the area I'm planting tomatoes as well. So the area I've done them the last 2 years kind of gets really shaded out once it comes midsummer. And that was the thing that kind of sucked about this year. So not only did we have a really hot summer where we had a lot of blossom drop, by the time my plants could really catch up, it was already really shaded in that area and I really wasn't able to get much more of a harvest. So I really only was able to get like the first few months, I would say like June into beginning of July, of really good tomatoes. And that was majority of what my harvest was this year, unfortunately. It was very disappointing. For this to be my 5th year garden and for me to plant as much as I did and to get probably, I would say maybe the same amount I got in my 1st or 2nd year gardening is very sad. I really wanted at least 20 quarts and I got 7. This is really good sauce regardless, but it is nonetheless kind of disappointing for the year. As much as I love tomato products, I actually do not like growing tomato plants at all. Honestly, I think they're quite annoying. They are prima donnas compared to other plants. And if it wasn't for tomato sauce and how amazing homegrown, homemade tomato sauce is, I honestly probably wouldn't grow tomatoes because I'm not a fresh tomato eater. I always plant paste varieties, and that's a question I get a lot of, is why I don't do like beef steaks or anything like that. Honestly, we just don't care for them really. If I were going to eat anything fresh, I'll just chop up a Roma real fast. And I like to have all the paste varieties for salsa and sauce. So, but yeah, this year was definitely a learning year. I thought the shaded area was actually going to help when it came to the extreme heat, but when it was just really, really hot for like a solid 3 or 4 weeks, and we were very, 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 very dry. So the tomatoes didn't really like it. So it was a tough year. It was a learning year. Just know that some things do well and some things don't. Like last week I did a video on my loofahs. Loofahs did absolutely amazing this year, but the year prior, my plants didn't get but a few feet tall. So I think that just goes to show you the saying. I don't really know if this is like the saying, but when people say they stored what they could when they had it, was because you never knew what the next year was going to bring. And I have a greater appreciation just for having what I've had throughout my lifetime, just because I know harvest can really be an ebb and flow, and we have lived in an abundant time period. So I think this just gives me a greater perspective on what ancestors had to deal with, especially when grocery stores weren't common. Like if you didn't have a good year, you may have gotten 7 quarts of tomato sauce, and that really won't do you too well throughout the year. I know I'm not the only one that had a horrible tomato growing year. Tomatoes and green beans this year were one of my worst. Like by far, tomatoes and green beans, worst crops, when years prior, those were my best. Just know I'm wishing you better luck next year. I'm hoping that we have the best harvest and abundance that we could possibly have in 2023. But yeah, this is disappointing, but I wanted to share the whole process with you guys. Either way, thank you for joining me today, and I will see you guys all next week. Bye!